The morning starts the same way. The alarm clock rings at 6 sharp, though I can't remember the last time I really slept until then. Old age brings its gifts, and insomnia is one of them. I lie with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the wall clock that Dorothy and I bought for our 20th wedding anniversary. My name is Wilfred Hemschill. I'm 78 years old, and for 4 years now I've been waking up alone in a house that's too big for a lonely old man. The morning ritual is the same. Take my pills, put the kettle on, get the oatmeal out. Dorothy always cooked for two, and I still sometimes catch myself pouring 2 servings. Out of habit, I turn to ask if it will have jam or honey today, but the question goes unanswered, only the echo of my own voice in the empty kitchen. As the kettle boils, I stare out the window at Elm Street. Our neighborhood in Bowers hasn't changed in the last 30 years. The same neat houses with small lawns, the same mailboxes the same distance from the road. Only the trees have gotten taller and the people have changed. Mrs. Clark, who lived across the street, died 2 years ago, and her house is now occupied by a young family with twins. They say hello to me, but they don't know my name. Dorothy died suddenly. Heart attack at the supermarket. She just went to get milk and never came back. It was a Wednesday, I remember, because I always made casserole on Wednesdays, and the milk ran out. "I'll go myself. You do your casserole," she said as she put on her blue coat. Those were her last words to me. 49 years of marriage ended in the dairy department between yogurt and cheese. The doctors said she wasn't in agony, as if that was supposed to comfort me. After breakfast, I go to the living room and sit in my chair, as usual. On the walls are pictures of our lives. The wedding. Dorothy in a simple white dress her mother made and me in a rented suit. We both look so young and insecure. Then the birth of Marilyn, our only child. Dorothy wanted more children, but it didn't work out. Pictures from vacations, which were not as many as I would have liked. I've always been careful with money. 43 years I worked as a bookkeeper for the Bowers Railroad Company. Not the most exciting job, but steady. Dorothy and I saved for retirement, dreaming of the trips we'd take when I retired. The Mediterranean, the Great Lakes, maybe even Japan. Dorothy always wanted to see the cherry blossoms. An album of clippings from travel brochures still sits on a shelf in the living room. I can't bring myself to throw it away. Instead of traveling, we got Marilyn's mortgage. My daughter has always been ambitious. She married Lloyd Trapnell when she was 26, a little late by the standards of our town, but Marilyn always said career first, then family. Lloyd works as a manager for a construction company, and Marilyn works as an administrator in a private clinic. Together they earn a decent income, but when 3 years ago they decided to buy a house in the prestigious Bowers neighborhood, the down payment was beyond their means. I still remember the night they came over for dinner. Dorothy had prepared a roast, Lloyd's favorite dish. Marilyn was especially nice, asking about my health, talking about her work, and then she mentioned in passing that she and Lloyd had looked at a house. "It's a great investment, Dad," she said, covering my hand with hers. "The neighborhood is growing, and in 5 years it'll double in value." I remember Dorothy tensing up. She could always sense when Marilyn was up to something. "Sounds wonderful, dear," she replied. "But can you afford it?" Lloyd coughed and set his fork aside. "Actually, that's what we wanted to talk about," he said with that peculiar smile that I later learned to recognize as a precursor to a request for money. "The bank has approved our mortgage, but it requires a substantial down payment." "We were thinking," Marilyn continued, squeezing my hand tighter, "maybe you could help us. It's for your granddaughter. Elsie deserves to grow up in a good neighborhood, go to a decent school." Elsie was 3 years old at the time. A blonde-haired girl with Dorothy's eyes, she was the center of our world. We'd do anything for her. "How much do you need?" I asked, already knowing that I would agree. The amount they said meant the end of our dreams of traveling. It was money that Dorothy and I had been saving for over 30 years, but it was our granddaughter, our blood. We'll pay it back, Marilyn assured me. As soon as the house goes up in value, we'll refinance the mortgage and give you every dime. Dorothy looked at me with concern. She was always more astute about these things. Wilfred, we need to discuss this privately, she said then. But I've already made up my mind. Perhaps it was my attempt to buy the affection of a daughter who was growing more aloof with each passing year. After college, she rarely came home, and when Lloyd came along, even less often. I hoped that helping with the house would bring us closer together, allow us to see our granddaughter more often. Of course we'll help, I said without looking at Dorothy. A family should support each other. That night was the beginning of the end of our dream. Not only did we give them money for the down payment, but we agreed to help with the mortgage payments each month. Dorothy was against it, but I insisted. It's hard on them, I said. They have a young child. Their careers are just starting. We already have everything. What about our plans? Dorothy asked. We've dreamed of traveling for 40 years. We'll get there, I said. The house is more important. It's an inheritance for Elsie, so we decided. We gave away all our savings and started transferring money to Marilyn's account every month. At first, her daughter called every day, inviting her to weekends, bringing Elsie. Dorothy and I were happy to be part of their lives again. But gradually, things changed. The calls became less frequent, the invitations more formal. Marilyn was always busy. Work, home, Elsie, social commitments. Lloyd was distant when we met, as if he tolerated our presence out of politeness. Often when we went to see them, it turned out they had other plans. "Oh, Dad, didn't I tell you we were going to Lloyd's parents' house today?" Marilyn wondered, even though I remembered that we hadn't talked about it. Dorothy understood, but she didn't say anything. She just started making more cookies for Elsie and kept spare gifts in the cupboard in case of unexpected visits, which were becoming less and less frequent. After Dorothy died, I thought Marilyn would visit me more often, that she would understand how lonely I was in an empty house. But the opposite happened. Now that I didn't have to maintain the appearance of family closeness for my mother's sake, she almost stopped calling. Once a month, on Sundays, they would come over for lunch, or rather, they would bring food from a restaurant because I shouldn't bother cooking at my age. Those Sunday lunches turned into an ordeal. Lloyd was constantly looking at his watch, Marilyn was checking her cell phone, and only Elsie, now 6 years old, was genuinely excited to see her grandfather. But even her interest in me began to wane under her parents' influence. "Grandpa, why do you smell like that?" she asked one day, wrinkling her nose. "How does it smell? Sunshine?" I wondered. "Old age," she answered with childlike directness. "Mommy says old people have a special smell." Marilyn blushed and pretended to be very busy putting food on plates. Lloyd snorted as if he heard something funny. "Elsie!" Marilyn shushed her. "You can't talk like that." "Why not?" The girl was genuinely surprised. "You were the one who told Daddy yesterday that Grandpa's house smelled old and dusty." There was an awkward silence in the room. I looked at my daughter, who avoided my gaze, and at my son-in-law, who could barely contain a chuckle. "I think we should go," Lloyd finally said, glancing defiantly at his watch. "We still have things to do today." They left, leaving me with an uneaten meal and a bitter residue. That night was the first time I thought about how they talked about me when I wasn't around. What else had Elsie heard about her grandfather? After that incident, I began to notice more. The way Marilyn wrinkles her nose when I start talking about the past. The way Lloyd rolls his eyes when he thinks I can't see. The way they look at me when I pause for a word, as if my slowed speech confirms their opinion of my decrepitude. And yet I was still transferring money to their mortgage every month. After Dorothy died, I could have stopped making those payments. My pension wasn't that great, and without spending on my wife's medications, I barely had enough myself. But I continued to help, hoping it would keep Marilyn in my life in some way. One day I heard Lloyd talking on the telephone in my garden while Marilyn was packing up Elsie's things after another Sunday visit. "Yes, at the old man's again," he was saying to someone. "What can you do? Once a month you can stand it. After all, he pays half our mortgage." I was standing behind the curtain in the living room, invisible to him, but his words hit me like a slap in the face. Be patient. That's what our meetings had become, an obligation to be tolerated for the sake of money. In that moment, something broke inside me. I realized I had become an ATM machine for my own daughter, a man tolerated out of politeness and self-interest, an invisible man in my own family. But I kept paying. I kept hoping that something would change, that Marilyn would remember sitting on my lap as a child while I read her stories, how I taught her to ride her bike, how proud I was of her first A, how I cried at her graduation. Maybe I was just afraid of losing that last connection with her. Maybe I was ashamed to admit that I'd failed as a father by raising a man for whom money was more important than relationships. Or maybe I was just afraid of finally being alone. Every month, as I transferred money into their account, I told myself I was doing it for Elsie, that my granddaughter shouldn't have to suffer because of her parents' callousness, that someday she would realize who really cared about her future. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was paying for the illusion of family, the right to sit at the same table once a month with people who think I'm a burden, fake smiles and insincere hugs. I've become a ghost in my own life, a man who is not noticed even when he sits across the table, a shadow they want to get rid of, but can't as long as it brings in money. The phone rang on Thursday afternoon. I was just trying to figure out the new TV remote. The old one was broken, and this one, with dozens of extra buttons, seemed designed to confuse people of my generation. "Hi, Dad." Marilyn's voice sounded tense, as it always did when she called out of the blue. "Marilyn, it's so good to hear from you." I was glad to hear from her, even though I knew the call was not unreasonable. "How's Elsie? How's Lloyd?" "He's fine," she answered quickly. "Listen, it's about Sunday. We can't make it. Lloyd has an important meeting with the partners." "Sunday?" I was surprised. "Okay. How about Saturday then?" Pause. "No, Saturday won't work either. We promised my mother-in-law to help with the garden." I squeezed the receiver tighter. It was the third canceled visit in the last 2 months. "I see. When can you make it?" "I don't know, Dad. There's so much going on right now. Work, home, Elsie's enrolled in her new sports program. I'll call you as soon as I have some free time, okay?" "Of course, darling," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "Say hello to Elsie." "I will. I've got to run." She hung up before I could say goodbye. I sat staring at the silent phone. Marilyn used to at least pretend to regret canceling appointments. Now even that was gone. I hung up the phone and looked at the picture of Dorothy on the mantelpiece. What would she say now? Probably something practical and wise. She always knew how to face the truth. The truth was that my daughter and son-in-law were avoiding me. Once-a-month meetings, which I had once thought insufficient, had now become a rarity. The last time I saw Elsie was almost 6 weeks ago. In that time, she must have grown another inch or two. Kids that age change so fast. The remote fell out of my hands, and I gave up trying to sort it out. Instead, I decided to go to the garden, the only place where I still felt useful. Dorothy had always loved roses, and I continued to tend them as if I were doing it for her. A neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, leaned over the fence as I trimmed the dry branches. "Good afternoon, Wilfred. I haven't seen your daughter and her family in a long time. Are they all right?" "Yes, just very busy," I replied, with a smile that must have looked fake. "You know, young families." "Oh yeah," she nodded. "By the way, I saw your granddaughter last week at the mall. She's such a sweet girl. They were there as a family having lunch at that new restaurant." I froze with my pruning shears in my hand. Last week, Marilyn said they couldn't make it because Elsie was sick. "A bad cold. We don't want to get you sick, Dad." Yeah, she's great, I mumbled, feeling a lump come up in my throat. Mrs. Patterson kept saying something, but I wasn't listening. All I could think was that they'd lied to me. Again. This wasn't the first time. 2 months ago, when I had called to congratulate Lloyd on his promotion, which I had learned about from the same Mrs. Patterson, he had sounded surprised and a little annoyed. You know already. We wanted to tell you ourselves on Sunday, but nobody mentioned it on Sunday. When I brought up Lloyd's career, he dismissed it. It's nothing special, just a little more responsibility, and it was exactly the promotion he'd been talking about for years. The big pay increase, the status, the prestige. But somehow they didn't want to share that joy with me. Another time, Marilyn casually mentioned a family trip to a water park. Elsie was thrilled with the slides, she said, and then hesitated when she realized she hadn't told me about these plans. When did you go? I asked then. Oh, 2 weeks ago, she said. It was just a free Saturday and it was spontaneous. That Saturday was Dorothy's birthday. I called Marilyn to remember her mother together, but her daughter didn't pick up. Later she texted, "Sorry, Dad, I've been working on an urgent project all day." With each such incident, the feeling grew that I was being purposefully excluded from their lives. I had become a stranger to my own family. The evening of the day Mrs. Patterson told me about the encounter at the mall, I sat in front of the photo album for a long time, flipping through the pages, watching Marilyn grow up. Here she was taking her first steps. Here she was walking to school with a huge satchel. Here she was graduating, college. When and how did she become a person who lies so easily to her own father? A week later, something happened that finally opened my eyes. I happened to meet Lloyd at the hardware store. He was standing in the tool department talking to a man. I was about to approach him when I heard my name. "Old geezer," Lloyd said with a chuckle. "The same stories every time." "When I worked on the railroad." Marilyn was sick of these stories, but she had to put up with them. The man he was talking to shook his head. "Sounds tiresome, but he's helping you with the mortgage, isn't he?" Lloyd shrugged as if it were a matter of course. "Well, it's the least he can do. The old man's got a lot of money anyway and nowhere to spend it. At least this way it won't go to waste." I froze behind the rack of screwdrivers, unable to move. My legs suddenly felt woozy, and there was a familiar pressure in my chest. "Breathe, Wilfred, just breathe," Dr. Reynolds would say. I took a deep breath and backed away slowly, trying to remain unnoticed. When I got to the car, I sat, gripping the steering wheel without starting the engine. The old marismatic. The least he can do. Won't go to waste. Lloyd's words echoed in my head. I couldn't sleep that night. Lying there, I thought about how Lloyd and Marilyn must be discussing me at home. I imagined them laughing at my forgetfulness, at my old-fashioned clothes, at how slowly I typed on the computer. Does my daughter, my only child, really speak of me with such disdain? My next visit with them was 2 weeks after this incident. I almost refused, but the desire to see Elsie overcame me. Now I was noticing things I had not seen or wanted to see before. The way Lloyd and Marilyn exchanged glances when I started to speak. The way they interrupted me halfway through, not letting me finish a thought. The way they dismissed my advice as if it were a pesky fly. When I asked Elsie how school was going, Lloyd intervened before she could answer. "It's fine, isn't it, honey? Let's go see that new cartoon you wanted." And he took his granddaughter away, leaving me with a puzzled look on my face. "He just wants to spend time with his daughter," Marilyn tried to explain, seeing my disappointment. "They see so little of each other because of his work." I nodded, pretending to understand, when in fact I understood something else. Lloyd didn't want Elsie to spend time with me. He was purposely alienating his granddaughter from her grandfather, and then something happened that shattered my illusions. In the kitchen, helping Marilyn with the dishes, I accidentally dropped a glass. The glass shattered on the floor. "I'm sorry, honey," I said, bending down to pick up the shards. "Don't, Dad!" Marilyn stopped me abruptly. "I got it." She pulled out a broom and dustpan, and I stood there, feeling helpless and clumsy. "Maybe I'd better go home," I asked quietly. Marilyn sighed without looking at me. "Whatever you want." There wasn't an ounce of regret in her voice. Only fatigue and, I thought, relief. At that moment I realized that I had become a burden to her, an unwanted guest in a house I was paying for. On the way home, I stopped at a gas station. While I was waiting for my car to fill up, I'm still not used to these new self-service pumps, I heard laughter. When I turned around, I saw a young couple with a small child. They were buying ice cream at a gas station convenience store, and the father was holding the toddler in his arms, lifting him up so he could choose his own flavor. It was such a simple, ordinary scene, but there was so much love in it, so much natural joy that my heart snapped. Once upon a time, Dorothy and little Marilyn and I were a family like that. What happened? At what point did my daughter stop looking at me with love? When did I go from being a daddy to an senile old man? The next day I called the bank and checked my account. Marilyn and Lloyd's next mortgage payment was due in 3 days. $2,500, half the monthly payment as we had agreed 3 years ago, an amount that ate up most of my pension, leaving me with only the bare minimum for medicine and food. I wondered what would happen if I stopped paying. Would they have had to sell the house? Or would they find a way to pay the mortgage on their own? After all, Lloyd had gotten a promotion and Marilyn was talking about a bonus at work. Maybe they didn't need my help anymore, but just didn't talk about it so the money would keep coming in. That thought stuck in my head like a thorn in my side. I began to remember all the times my daughter and son-in-law had shown signs of financial prosperity. Lloyd's new car, Marilyn's expensive jewelry, Elsie's private school, the vacation in Florida last year. Could they really have done without my help all this time? Am I really that blind? 2 days later, something happened that confirmed my worst fears. I went to the supermarket, and as I passed the wine section, I saw Lloyd. He was picking out an expensive champagne and talking on the phone. "Yeah, closed the deal today," he said with obvious satisfaction. "The biggest contract of the year. The bonus is going to be huge, Jack. I think we can finally start thinking about a second car." I retreated behind the rack, not wanting to be seen. So Lloyd was doing more than well. So well, in fact, that he was planning on buying a second car, and yet they kept taking my money, pretending they were barely making ends meet. Back at home, I pulled out Marilyn's mortgage binder. I reread the contract we'd signed 3 years ago. It clearly stated that I would help with the payments for 5 years, after which the agreement could be renegotiated by mutual agreement of the parties. 5 years. 2 more years of this farce. 2 more years of humiliation and lies. I sat in my chair, holding that folder, and felt anger growing inside. Not the fierce, burning anger of youth, but the cold, hard realization that you had been betrayed by the people closest to you. The doorbell rang. Mrs. Patterson stood on the doorstep with a pie. "I thought I'd drop it off for you, Wilfred. I've baked too much for just myself." I invited her in for tea, grateful for her company. We sat in the kitchen talking about the weather, her arthritis, the new neighbors across the street. And then, out of the blue, I asked, "Margaret, do you think I look, senile?" She choked on her tea. "What nonsense, Wilfred. You're one of the most clear-thinking people I know. What makes you think that?" I didn't tell her about the conversation I'd overheard. Instead, I shrugged my shoulders. "I just wonder sometimes. At my age, you start to doubt yourself." Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "Nonsense. You're holding up just fine. Much better than my Henry at your age, God rest his soul." We talked some more, and she squeezed my hand before she left. "You know, Wilfred, sometimes family is not those we are related to by blood, but those who treat us with respect and love." Her words hit something deep inside me. I thought about them all evening, going over in my mind all the small but painful acts of disrespect I had experienced from Marilyn and Lloyd in recent years. I remembered how last Christmas they had forgotten to invite me to a family dinner, and I only found out about it from a casual conversation with Elsie. How during their rare visits they kept glancing at the clock, obviously counting the minutes until they left. How Lloyd interrupted me half-heartedly, and Marilyn wouldn't stand up for her father. I remembered how I had once offered to drive Elsie to school when Marilyn had an important meeting and Lloyd was on a business trip. My daughter crumpled for a long moment, then admitted she was afraid to trust me to drive with a child in the car. "You've gotten too slow to react, Dad." Although I had taken a physical exam to renew my driver's license just a month ago and the doctor found no problem with my reactions, I remembered their condescending smiles as I tried to figure out the new smartphone they had gotten me for my birthday. "Don't worry, Dad, you don't need it. Just use it to make calls." As if I wasn't capable of learning something new. And most of all, I remembered how Marilyn, my little girl, increasingly took my husband's side in any disagreements between us, how she stopped protecting me, stopped seeing me as a father. To her, I was just an old man who only wanted money. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I thought back to the years I'd spent with Dorothy, our dreams and plans. What would she say now? She was always straightforward, my Dorothy. "Wilfred," she would say, "you're being used. Open your eyes." In the morning, I made a decision. I will no longer turn a blind eye to the truth. I won't pretend I don't see how I'm being used. It was time to face reality. To Marilyn and Lloyd, I was just a source of money, an ATM machine with gray hair. I pulled out Dorothy's picture and stared at it for a long time. "You were right, dear," I said aloud. As always, I knew what I had to do. But it required a courage I hadn't had in a long time. The courage to admit that my own daughter had betrayed me. The courage to sever the financial bond that was the only thing that still connected us. The next day I received an invitation, for the first time in a long time, to come to Elsie's birthday party. My granddaughter's 7th birthday. Of course, I accepted. And secretly wondered, would they have called me if they knew what I was thinking? If they knew I'd finally realized who I really was to them? Elsie's birthday fell on a Saturday. I woke up early before the alarm clock even rang with a sense of vague anxiety. It was a momentous occasion. My granddaughter was turning 7. At her age, a birthday is a real celebration, full of wonder and excitement. I wanted to be a part of that day. The day before, I spent almost 2 hours picking out a gift. Marilyn didn't go into too much detail when I asked what Elsie would like to receive, just threw in something like, she loves these new interactive toys. I had no idea what interactive meant, so I enlisted the help of the clerk at the children's store, a sweet girl who patiently explained to me the ins and outs of modern toys. In the end, I chose an art kit, something to do with making my own glowing crystals. Elsie had always loved everything bright and shiny. The packaging promised hours of exciting science experiments. I liked the idea of giving my granddaughter not just a toy, but something that would spark her interest in science. Dorothy would approve of this choice. I carefully wrapped the box in unicorn gift paper, which the same saleswoman recommended as the most popular among girls this age. Then I added the card, thinking long and hard about the text. Finally, he wrote simply, "To my dear Elsie on her birthday. Love, Grandpa." The birthday invitation came by telephone. Marilyn called a week ago and said, "Dad, Elsie's birthday is next Saturday. A small party, just family and a couple of her friends. It starts at 2 o'clock. I asked if she needed my help with the arrangements, but she quickly declined. No, we'll organize everything. Just be there by 2. Now, dressed in my best casual suit, navy blue slacks and a light-colored jacket that Dorothy always referred to as professorial, I reflected on the fact that Marilyn hadn't mentioned any special requests or dress code. though perhaps such things are no longer accepted. The modern world moves too fast for someone of my generation. Before going out, I took one more look at myself in the mirror, adjusted my tie, and combed my thinning hair. I wanted to look dignified. I wanted Elsie to be proud of her grandfather. The drive to Marilyn and Lloyd's house took about 20 minutes. They lived in the same upscale neighborhood for which I had given up my savings and dreams of traveling. Wide streets, large lots, manicured lawns. The house they bought was 2 stories, with a bay window and a spacious terrace. Every time I drove up to it, I had mixed feelings: pride in being able to help my daughter get a house like this, and bitterness at the price I had paid for it. I parked the car 2 houses away. There were no spaces closer. It looked like there were more guests gathered than family and a couple friends. There were at least 6 cars in the driveway, and tables with brightly colored tablecloths were set up on the lawn. Colorful balloons tied to every tree and bush. A large banner hung at the entrance. "Happy birthday, Elsie." I took the gift and got out of the car. The day was warm and sunny, perfect for an outdoor celebration. As I approached the house, I heard children's laughter and music. The door was ajar, but I rang the bell anyway. I didn't want to go in uninvited. No one answered. I waited and rang again. Then I gently pushed the door open. "Is anyone there?" "It's Wilfred." There were voices and music coming from the back of the house, but no one was in the hallway. I walked in, closing the door behind me, and headed toward the back of the house where the noise was coming from. The terrace and backyard were full of people. Children ran between the inflatable rides. Adults stood in groups talking and laughing. A long table with treats and a huge 3-tiered cake was set up in the center of the courtyard. I didn't immediately notice Marilyn. She was standing near the barbecue talking to some woman. My daughter looked elegant in a light summer dress. She was smiling and gesticulating, not at all like the tense, hurried Marilyn I had seen on our rare visits. Elsie ran among the children in a bright pink princess dress with a glittering tiara on her head. Her laughter rang out over the garden, and my heart filled with warmth. How she had grown in those months! She looked more and more like Dorothy, the same eyes, the same curve of her lips when she smiled. I stood on the edge of the terrace with the gift in my hands, not knowing how to fit in with the noisy fun. No one seemed to notice me. Dorothy's absence was especially poignant in these situations. She would have known what to say, who to approach. She would have made me feel like I was part of what was happening, not an observer. Finally, I spotted Lloyd. He was standing by the barbecue, flipping meat and laughing at something the tall man next to him was saying. Lloyd was wearing a brightly colored Hawaiian shirt and shorts, an outfit I'd never seen my usually strictly dressed son-in-law in. I took a deep breath and headed toward him. "Good afternoon, Lloyd," I said as I stepped closer. He turned around and the smile on his face faltered. For a few seconds he stared at me as if he'd seen a ghost. "Wilfred?" he finally said. "What are you doing here?" There was no joy in his voice, just surprise and something else, irritation. "I came to wish Elsie a happy birthday," I answered, trying to stay calm. "Marilyn invited me." Lloyd cast a quick glance at my daughter, who was still busy talking and hadn't noticed my appearance. "That's odd," he said. "We weren't expecting you today." I felt the blood rush to my face. "Marilyn called a week ago. Said the party starts at 2 o'clock. Lloyd shrugged, his face growing tense. "There must be some mistake. We're only having close friends over tonight. We're planning a family party for next weekend." I was confused. Had I misunderstood? Or did Marilyn forget to mention 2 different celebrations? But then why even invite me tonight? "I'm sorry," I said. "I was sure." At that moment, Elsie came running toward us. Her eyes widened with joy when she saw me. "Grandfather," she exclaimed, hugging my legs. "You've come." I leaned over and hugged my granddaughter, feeling my throat constrict with tenderness. "Of course you came, sweetheart. How could I have missed your birthday? Here, this is for you." I held out the present to her, and Elsie grabbed it with an enthusiastic squeak. "Can I open it now?" she asked, looking at her father. Lloyd pressed his lips together. "Better put it with the rest of the presents, honey. You'll open them all together like we agreed." Elsie nodded and ran off with the box. I watched her go, glad for this brief moment of connection. When I turned back to Lloyd, his face was even colder. "Listen, Wilfred," he said quietly, so none of the guests would hear. "I don't know what Marilyn's messed up, but tonight it's just friends and their kids. You're here. You're not exactly in the right place." I felt something inside me clench, out of place, at my own granddaughter's birthday party. "I don't understand," I said. "Marilyn definitely invited me." "Then where's your invitation?" Lloyd asked with a slight sneer. "What invitation?" "The electronic one. We sent it out to all the guests. There was a dress code and a request to confirm attendance." It made me feel old and stupid. An Evite? I didn't even know they existed. "Marilyn called me. In person," I repeated. "Well, there's been a misunderstanding," Lloyd said. "Anyway, as you can see, we have a house full of guests. All the seats at the table are taken, and the presents have been bought. Maybe you should come next weekend." I stood there, not knowing what to say. Everything inside me protested against this treatment, but years of suppressing my feelings for the sake of family peace had taken their toll. "Of course," I said at last. "I don't want to make trouble. Tell Elsie I'll come back another time." I turned to leave, feeling my cheeks burning with humiliation. And then I saw Marilyn. She had finally noticed me and was now walking quickly across the terrace, her face a mixture of surprise and alarm. "Dad," she said as she came closer. "Are you leaving already?" "Yes," I answered. Lloyd explained to me that today was not a family holiday. Marilyn threw a quick glance at her husband in which I read not indignation, but rather confusion. "Lloyd, what are you talking about?" she asked, but there was no real protest in her voice. "Of course Dad's invited." "You said yourself that it was just close friends tonight," Lloyd replied with a push. "And the family dinner was planned for next weekend." Marilyn looked uncertain. "Yes, but I thought, I mean..." At that moment, the man Lloyd had been talking to earlier approached us. "Lloyd, the barbecue is smoking. I think the meat's starting to burn." My son-in-law grunted and rushed over to the grill. The man looked at me curiously. "Hi, I'm Greg, the Trapnell's neighbor," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Wilfred Hemschill," I replied, shaking it. "Marilyn's father." "Oh!" His eyebrows rose. "It's nice to finally meet you. Lloyd's told me a lot about you." Something in his tone made me wary. I could only imagine what my son-in-law had told the neighbors about me. "Hopefully only good things," I said with a fake smile. Greg laughed, but awkwardly. "Of course, especially about how you're helping them with this beautiful house. That's very generous of you." I felt Marilyn tense up beside me. She had always been against outsiders knowing about our financial arrangement. "Just helping out the family," I said neutrally. "Greg, could you check to see if the animator is all right?" Marilyn intervened. "I think he's running late." When the neighbor stepped away, she turned to me with a strained smile. "Dad, would it really be better if you came some other time? It's so hectic today, we don't even have time to have a proper conversation." I looked at her for a long moment. My daughter, my only daughter, actually asked me to leave my own granddaughter's birthday party. "You actually invited me over for today," I said. It wasn't a question. Marilyn averted her eyes. I thought I was talking about next weekend. I'm sorry if you misunderstood." I understood everything. She was lying. Maybe she'd actually invited me over in a fit of filial conscience and then regretted it. Or more likely, she never planned on having me here, but didn't have the guts to say so. It was easier to blame it on a misunderstanding. "Okay," I said calmly. "I'll go home." "Thanks for understanding, Dad," Marilyn breathed out with relief. "I'll call you tomorrow and we'll make arrangements for next weekend." I nodded, not believing a word she said. As I turned to leave, I saw Elsie. She was standing nearby, clearly having heard part of the conversation and now looking at me wide-eyed. "Are you leaving, grandfather?" she asked disappointedly. "But you just got here." I didn't know what to say. I couldn't tell a 7-year-old girl that her parents were kicking me out. At that moment, Lloyd returned. He saw Elsie beside me and frowned. "Honey, go to your friends," he said. "The clown is about to start the show." "But Grandpa's leaving," Elsie objected. "I want him to stay." Lloyd's face darkened. "Elsie, go to your friends. Go to your friends at once." His tone was unobjectionable. Elsie gave me one last sad look and wandered reluctantly toward the group of children. I stood staring after her and felt something heavy and cold growing inside me. Something like anger, but deeper and stronger. "I'll go," I said quietly. But Lloyd must have decided that this wasn't over. Maybe my appearance had spoiled his mood, or maybe he just thought it was the right moment to set the record straight. "Listen, Wilfred," he said, lowering his voice, but not enough so that the guests standing nearby couldn't hear. "I don't know how else to explain it to you. You weren't invited to this party." It was as if time had stopped. I saw Marilyn's eyes widen, the guests around us freeze, some of them turn away, pretending they hadn't heard the words. "You weren't invited to this party." A simple phrase, said louder than necessary, said with poorly concealed irritation, said in such a way as to humiliate me in front of all these people. And the switch to "you," as if I were a delinquent child, not his wife's father. I felt the blood rush from my face. Suddenly it was hard to breathe. All those years of neglect, all the little humiliations, all the false promises, all of it concentrated in this moment, in this phrase. I looked at Marilyn. She stood with her hand to her mouth, but she didn't utter a word in my defense, not a single word. "I understand," I said finally, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "I apologize for the inconvenience." I turned and walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. No one called me back. I walked through the house, went outside, and got into my car. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't immediately put the key in the ignition. "You weren't invited to this party." All the way home, those words echoed in my head. I remembered Lloyd's face when he'd said them cold, almost satisfied, as if he'd been waiting a long time for an opportunity to tell me that. I remembered how Marilyn had stood by his side, not standing up for her father. I remembered Elsie's sad eyes when she was sent away. At home, I sat in my chair and stared into space for a long time. Something had changed in me. It was as if the last thread that bound me to the man I had been before, the man willing to endure humiliation for the illusion of marital well-being, had burst. "You weren't invited to this party." Lloyd didn't just point me out the door. He made it publicly clear that I was a stranger in their lives, an unwanted guest, a nuisance. Marilyn didn't call that night. I didn't expect her to. She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. When I woke up the next morning, I knew what I had to do. It was a decision I'd been making for a long time, but I hadn't found the strength. Now it was very clear. After breakfast, I sat down by the phone and dialed the number of the bank. A woman's voice answered after the third ring. "Bowers, First Bank. How can I help you?" "Good morning," I said. "My name is Wilfred Hemshill. I'd like to cancel all automatic payments from my account." "Of course, Mr. Hemshill. I'll need to ask a few verification questions." The procedure took about 15 minutes. The bank employee asked me several times if I was sure, especially when it came to the large monthly transfer to Marilyn and Lloyd Trapnell's account. "Yes, I want to cancel that payment too," I confirmed. "Very well, Mr. Hemshill. The cancellation will be effective immediately. The next scheduled payment, which was due the day after tomorrow, will no longer be honored." When I hung up the phone, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if I had dropped a heavy weight that I had been carrying around for years. The rest of the day, passed in a kind of daze. I felt neither regret nor gloating, only a calm certainty that I had done the right thing. The phone rang the next morning while I was eating breakfast. Marilyn's number. I didn't answer it. He called several more times throughout the day, but I didn't pick up. On the third day, there was a knock on the door. A sharp, insistent knock. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Lloyd stood on the doorstep, his face contorted with anger. "What have you done?" he blurted out instead of greeting. "Do you realize what you've done?" I looked at him calmly. His anger didn't touch me anymore. "Good morning, Lloyd," I said. "If you mean the mortgage payments, yes, I canceled them." "But why?" he exclaimed. "We had an agreement." "We did," I agreed. "But you see, I thought about it and decided that there was no point in paying for a house I wasn't welcome in, a house I'm not invited to." Lloyd's face changed. Anger changed to something akin to panic. "Look, Wilfred," he said, trying to speak more calmly. "If it's because of that incident at the birthday party, I overreacted. I apologize. I accept your apology." I nodded, "but my decision still stands. You can't just stop making payments." His voice was angry again. "We have a contract." "Yes, a contract," I agreed. "It clearly states that I can stop the aid at any time I choose. Paragraph 6, paragraph 2. You can read it again." Lloyd looked like he'd been punched. He really didn't expect me to remember the terms of the agreement. "But how are we going to pay?" he asked in a different tone of voice. "The amount is huge." "You got a promotion, Lloyd," I reminded him, "and you were planning on buying a second car. I'm sure you can handle it." His eyes widened. He clearly hadn't expected me to know about his plans. It was just a conversation," he mumbled. "We weren't going to—" "It's none of my business anymore," I interrupted him. "Your house, your mortgage, your decisions." Lloyd stood looking at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. Perhaps he'd never seen the real me, just a comfortable old man who pays their bills. "You can't do this to us," he said at last. "To Elsie. You're her grandfather." "Yes, I'm her grandfather," I agreed. "A grandfather who isn't invited to her birthday party, who can only see his granddaughter when it suits her parents, who's just an ATM machine for your family." Lloyd went pale. Who told you?" "No one told me," I replied. "I just listened. And watching. All these years." We stood in silence. We could hear the birds singing in the garden and the mail car honking in the next street. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary day that had been a turning point for both of us. "What shall I tell Marilyn?" Lloyd asked at last. "The truth," I answered. "That her father won't be paying your mortgage anymore." He made one last attempt. "Please, Wilfred, let's talk about this. Maybe we can find a compromise." I shook my head. "I'm afraid not. My decision is final." Lloyd stood still as if he couldn't believe that all his entreaties were useless. "Good luck." I said my last words and closed the door. I was expecting a storm, and it didn't take long. Only 3 hours had passed since Lloyd's visit when Marilyn appeared on the doorstep. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged, obvious signs of tears. She didn't wait for an invitation and stormed in as soon as I opened the door. "How could you, Dad?" she exclaimed without even saying hello. "How could you do this to us?" I closed the door and walked into the living room. Marilyn followed me, her voice getting higher and higher. "Do you realize what you've done? We can't pay the mortgage without your help. The bank will foreclose on the house and we'll be on the street. Is that what you want? Your granddaughter to be homeless?" I sat down in my chair and looked at my daughter. She was standing in the middle of the room, clenching and unclenching her fists, angry and confused at the same time. "Sit down, Marilyn," I said calmly. "Let's talk like adults." "What is there to talk about?" she exclaimed, but sank down on the edge of the couch. "You left us in the lurch." "Left us in the lurch?" I asked her again. "That's an interesting way of putting it. I've been paying half of your mortgage for 3 years. I gave all my savings for the down payment. Is that called abandonment?" Marilyn looked away. "You know what I mean. We were counting on your help. We planned our budget with your payments in mind. Did you ever think that one day those payments might stop? I don't last forever, Marilyn. What would you do if I died?" That question caught her off guard. She blinked several times as if the thought had never occurred to her. "But you're alive," she said at last, "and you promised to help us." "Yes, I did," I agreed. "And I did, until I realized that I was just a source of money for you, a man who is tolerated for financial gain." "That's not true," she objected, but there was a twinkle of guilt in her eyes. "It is true, Marilyn, and we both know it. You lied to me about your plans, canceled meetings, didn't invite me to family events, and then your husband publicly humiliated me at my granddaughter's birthday party." "Lloyd overreacted," she muttered. "He already apologized to you." "He only apologized because I stopped paying," I said firmly, "not because he was truly sorry." Marilyn was silent. Then she tried to come at it from the other side. "Dad, look, I know we haven't always been attentive to you, and I apologize for that, I do. But are you really going to punish Elsie for her parents' mistakes? This is it. The move I've been waiting for. Using my love for my granddaughter. It's always worked before." "Elsie has done nothing wrong," I agreed. "And I'm still her grandfather, but your house is your responsibility, not mine." "But we can't afford these payments," she sounded hysterical. "We'd have to sell the house, move to some shithole." "Lloyd has a good job," I reminded her. "He just got a promotion. You're making good money, too. Maybe you'll just have to cut back on some of the excesses." "What excesses?" Marilyn was indignant. "Lloyd's new car, your designer handbags, a vacation in Florida, private school for Elsie. It all costs money, Marilyn." She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "But these are normal things. It's how all our friends live." "Maybe," I nodded, "but your friends pay their own expenses, not take money from their old parents." Marilyn jumped up, her face red with anger. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. You're my father. You're supposed to help me." "I've been helping you all your life," I replied calmly. "I paid for your education, your wedding, your house. But I don't have to support you forever, especially when you and your husband treat me with such disdain." "Ungrateful old man," she exclaimed, and the words hit me like a slap. "After all we have done for you." "What have you done for me, Marilyn?" I asked quietly. "What did you do for me?" She opened her mouth but couldn't answer. Then she tried again. We came to see you. We brought Elsie, invited you to dinners. Once a month," I finished for her, "when it suited you, and only as long as I paid." "That's not fair," she exclaimed. "We were taking care of you." "No, Marilyn, you took care of my money, and now that it's gone, I'm suddenly an ungrateful old man." She looked at me, and I could see the emotions changing in her eyes: anger, confusion, fear. Finally she spoke again, but in a different tone, cold and calculating. "Okay, Dad, if that's what you decide, we can handle it ourselves. But you must understand the consequences of your choice." "And what are they?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "You won't see Elsie again," she said, looking me straight in the eye. "No more visits, no more phone calls. If you don't want to be a part of our family financially, you won't be a part of it at all." There it was, the threat I feared most, to lose my last connection to my granddaughter. It used to be a prospect that terrified me so much that I was willing to endure any humiliation to prevent it from happening. But now, looking at my daughter, the person I had raised with love and care, who was now using her own child as a tool of manipulation, I felt nothing but exhaustion and frustration. "It's your decision, Marilyn," I said. "If you're willing to deprive your daughter of her grandfather for money, there's nothing I can do about it. But think what you'll say to Elsie when she asks why she doesn't see me anymore." That hit the mark. Marilyn swallowed. For a moment, her mask of coldness cracked. "I'll tell her the truth," she said in a trembling voice, "that her grandfather had chosen money over his family." "No, Marilyn," I shook my head. "You chose money over family. I just stopped paying for your respect." She stood looking at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. Maybe she had. Maybe she'd never seen me as a human being, just an ATM with gray hair. "You're going to regret this," she said finally. "When you're all alone, when there's no one to take care of you in your old age, you'll regret it." "Maybe," I agreed. "But the only thing I regret now is that I didn't do it sooner." She turned and headed for the exit. She stopped at the door and tossed it over her shoulder. "Don't call us. Don't try to contact Elsie. If you change your mind, you know what you have to do." The door slammed shut with such force that the glass rattled. I sat motionless, staring at Dorothy's portrait on the wall. What would she say now? Would she approve of my decision or reproach me for my rigidity? I didn't know. But there was a strange calm inside me. It was as if after a long illness there was relief, painful but cleansing. I slept better that night than I had in months. The next 2 weeks passed in silence. No calls, no visits. I gardened, read books, occasionally went into town to do some shopping. I was surprised to find that I didn't feel as lonely as I had expected. On the contrary, freed from the oppressive feeling of being used, I felt an unprecedented lightness. On one such day, I met Margaret Patterson in the supermarket. She looked embarrassed to see me. "Wilfred," she said as she came closer, "I've heard, there's talk in town that I stopped paying Marilyn and Lloyd's mortgage." I finished it for her. "Yes, that's true." Margaret nodded, then lowered her voice. "I don't mean to sound like a gossip, but you should know. They're saying terrible things about you." I sighed. "I can imagine. Lloyd is telling everywhere that you've abandoned your own family. I'm sorry, Wilfred, but he calls you a greedy old man who would rather save money for a funeral than help his own granddaughter." I felt a wave of anger rising inside, but I forced myself to calm down. "And how many people believe him?" Margaret shrugged embarrassedly. "Some do, especially those who don't know you personally. But, Wilfred, this isn't the first time they've said that about you." I froze. "What do you mean?" "They've been complaining about you for years," she said quietly. "Even when you were paying their mortgage. I heard Lloyd say at the Johnsons' barbecue last summer that you were giving them money at the drop of a hat and making them work for every dime with humiliating visits." I felt a lump come up to my throat. All those years, all my sacrifices, and this is how they talked about me behind my back. "And Marilyn?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Margaret looked away. She didn't usually contradict him. Sometimes she even agreed with him. "I'm sorry, Wilfred. I didn't mean to upset you." "You didn't upset me, Margaret," I said, surprised at how true that was. "You confirmed what I already knew in my heart." We talked some more, and she squeezed my hand before parting. "Don't let them vilify you, Wilfred. Those who really know you know the truth." In the following weeks, I began to notice changes in Marilyn and Lloyd's lives. Nothing dramatic, just minor signs of financial difficulties. Lloyd stopped arriving in his new Mercedes. I saw their old Honda instead. Marilyn gave up the expensive spa treatments she used to regularly post about on social media. One day, I happened to meet the mother of one of Elsie's friends at a bookstore. She greeted me kindly, and we got to talking. "How is Elsie doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, she's fine," the woman replied. "Although, of course, she had a hard time with the transfer to public school. But kids adapt quickly, don't they? So they couldn't afford private school anymore." I nodded, feeling mixed emotions, regret that Elsie had to go through such a change, but also satisfaction that Marilyn and Lloyd were finally facing reality. I learned from Mrs. Patterson that they had begun borrowing money from Lloyd's parents. His father was complaining to Henry Johnson on a fishing trip, she recounted. Said they were asking for more and more and he didn't know how to refuse them. I was sitting in my garden pruning roses when I heard a car horn honk. Looking up, I saw Marilyn's Honda driving by. She didn't stop, didn't even look in my direction, but I caught a glimpse of Elsie in the back seat. My granddaughter pressed herself against the window and waved to me before the car disappeared around the corner. That small gesture warmed my heart. It meant she hadn't forgotten me. It meant Marilyn hadn't completely cut me out of her daughter's life. A month after we broke up, I received a letter from Marilyn and Lloyd's bank. They asked me to confirm that I would no longer be making mortgage payments so that they could adjust the terms of the loan to reflect the changed circumstances. I sent the confirmation the same day. Another week later, I saw an ad in the local paper. Marilyn and Lloyd's house was for sale. The price was listed well below market value. They were clearly in a hurry to sell. I sat with Dorothy's picture for a long time that evening. "You were right, dear," I said aloud. "You can't buy love, not even from your own children." Life went on. I found unexpected solace in routine, daily walks, reading books, tending the garden. I began to talk more often with neighbors, especially with Mrs. Patterson, who proved to be an attentive listener and a wise interlocutor. One day, while sorting through old things in the attic, I found a scrapbook of travel brochures that Dorothy and I had once compiled as we dreamed of traveling in retirement. I flipped through the yellowed pages, looking at pictures of Venice, Paris, Tokyo, places we never got to see because I decided family was more important. Perhaps it was time to finally realize those dreams. After all, now that I was no longer giving most of my pension to Marilyn's mortgage, I had some spare cash. Not as much as I used to, I can't get my savings back, but enough for a modest trip. I closed the album and went downstairs. On the table was an invitation to the Bauer School of Accountancy reunion, an annual event I usually skipped, thinking I didn't have the time or energy for small talk. But now, looking at the neatly printed card, I thought, why not? Maybe it's time to start living for myself. Maybe at 78 it's not too late to start a new chapter. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the number listed on the invitation. It was time to step out of the shadows and back into the world. After all, I was no longer invisible. I was Wilfred Hemschill, a man who had finally found the strength to stand up for his dignity. The decision came unexpectedly. I was sitting in my living room going through old photo albums when I realized I hadn't thought of Marilyn and Lloyd for a week with the bitterness that used to grip my heart. The pain had dulled, leaving behind a strange emptiness, as if the space that had been occupied by resentment and disappointment was now waiting for something new. I looked around the room, a spacious room with old furniture and worn photographs on the walls. Every corner of this house held memories of life with Dorothy, of raising Marilyn, of family dinners and holidays. But now those memories seemed to belong to another life, another person. "I need to change something," I said aloud, turning to Dorothy's picture. "There are too many ghosts." The next morning I called the realtor, a young woman named Veronica Knight, whom I had heard good things about from Mrs. Patterson. "I want to sell the house," I said without preamble when she answered. Veronica turned out to be a professional. Within 2 days she had already inspected the house, assessed its condition, and suggested a selling strategy. "The house is in a good neighborhood, Mr. Hemschill," she said, making notes on her clipboard. "But frankly, it needs some updating. Today's buyers prefer open floor plans, new plumbing fixtures, built-in appliances." "I'm not going to renovate," I interrupted her. "We're selling as is. I'm willing to compromise on the price if it speeds up the process." She looked at me with surprise. "Are you sure? With a small investment, you can increase the value considerably." "I'm sure," I nodded. "Money is not the most important thing right now. It's more important to start a new life." Veronica smiled understandingly. "Good," Mr. Hemshill. Have you thought about where you're going to move? That question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the idea of getting out of here that I hadn't thought about a specific place. Something compact, I said after a pause. Maybe an apartment, in another neighborhood in Bowers. I have a few options in mind, Veronica perked up. Do you prefer a quiet neighborhood or closer to the center? I wondered. All my life I'd chosen predictability and quiet. Maybe it was time for something new. Closer to the center, I decided, where there's more life. Veronica brightened up. I have the perfect option for you. Riverview is a new building by the river, a 10-minute walk from the main square. Beautiful views, modern layouts, convenient infrastructure. Sounds good, I agreed. When can I see it? I'll be off in 2 hours, if you're not busy. I'm free, I said, and the words suddenly took on a new meaning. I was free of obligations, of guilt, of having to conform to someone else's expectations. The apartment at Riverview was exactly as I'd imagined, modern, bright, with large windows and a view of the river. 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room with a kitchen and a small balcony. No extra rooms, no empty spaces echoing with lonely footsteps. There is a concierge here, Veronica told me, showing me the apartment. 24-hour security, underground parking. On the first floor there is a gym and a recreation room where the residents often organize joint events. What kind of activities? I asked. Oh, all kinds. Movie nights, book clubs, sometimes just tea parties. There are a lot of active retirees here, Mr. Hemshill. I think you'll find plenty of people to socialize with. I went to the window and looked out over the river. The sun's glare played on the water, creating the illusion of moving lights. Something about this picture touched me, maybe the sense of constant movement, of change, of new possibilities. I'll take it, I said, not taking my eyes off the river. Veronica glowed. Great decision. Let's discuss the details. Events moved quickly. My house sold in 3 weeks to a young couple with a young child who were not embarrassed by the outdated design. They saw potential and soul in the house, and that was strangely comforting to me. Life went on. It was just that now there would be other voices here, new memories. I didn't organize a rummage sale or invite Marilyn to pick up something as a keepsake. I sold most of the furniture and household items along with the house. I kept only the essentials and the truly valuable, Dorothy's photographs, a few books, her favorite vase, my collector's watch, anything that could fit in a small truck. Marilyn heard about the sale of the house from Mrs. Patterson and called me, the first time in 2 months. Are you selling the house? She asked without preamble, her voice tense. Already sold it, I answered calmly. And you weren't going to tell me about it. I could hear the indignation in her voice. This is my childhood home. The house you hadn't visited in months, I reminded her. The house you refused to see me in. She hesitated, then changed tactics. Dad, look, I know we've had our differences, but we're a family. We can work things out. Can we? I asked. Or do you just want the money from the sale of the house? Marilyn didn't answer, and her silence was more eloquent than any words. Just as I thought, I sighed. Goodbye, Marilyn. I hung up the phone, feeling not bitter but strangely relieved. The last thread linking me to the past had been severed. The move to the new apartment had only taken 1 day. I stood in the middle of the empty living room surrounded by boxes, and for the first time in a long time I felt free. It was as if, with every mile between the old house and the new apartment, I was leaving behind a piece of the heaviness I'd been carrying around all these years. That first evening there was a knock on the door. An elderly woman stood on the doorstep with a tray of homemade scones. "Welcome to Riverview," she smiled. "I'm Eunice Barrow, your neighbor on the left. I thought you might not have much time to cook since you moved." That's how I met Eunice. a 69-year-old widow, a former school teacher with a sharp mind and an unexpected sense of humor. She invited me to the weekly book club meeting, which was held in the common room on the first floor. Nothing special, just a few old people discussing books and gossiping, she said with a smile. But it's better than sitting in four walls, right? So I went. For the first time in years, I was in the company of people who didn't know me as Marilyn's father or Elsie's grandfather. People who didn't need my money and who saw me simply as Wilfred, a man with his own stories, opinions, and feelings. The book club was the beginning. Other discoveries followed. A jazz club where I remembered my youthful love of music, morning walks along the waterfront with a group of early birds like me, Sunday games of chess with Howard Fisher, a retired math professor who became my first real friend in years. One day during breakfast with Eunice, by then we were meeting regularly for morning coffee, I mentioned a scrapbook of travel brochures. "My wife and I have always dreamed of traveling," I said. "We saved up money, planned itineraries, but we never got around to it." Eunice stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "What's stopping you from doing it now, Wilfred?" I was confused. "I'm 78 years old. Isn't it too late to start?" She laughed, genuinely, without condescension. "My neighbor in the stairwell is 83, and she just got back from a Mediterranean cruise. She says it was the best decision of her life." That same evening, I pulled out an old scrapbook and began leafing through it. Yellowed pages, faded photos, notes made by Dorothy's hand. Venice, must take a gondola ride. Paris, climb the Eiffel Tower at sunset. Rome, throw a coin in the Trevi fountain to come back. "Why not?" I asked Dorothy's picture. "I'll do it for both of us." The first trip was a week-long trip to Venice. I joined a group of tourists my age, similarly not so young people who had finally decided to fulfill their long-held dreams. Walking through the narrow streets, taking a gondola ride, evening coffee in Piazza San Marco. I photographed everything like an enthusiastic teenager, and every night I would tell Dorothy about the day by looking at her picture on my phone. When I got home, I found a message on my answering machine from Marilyn. She talked about how she and Lloyd had moved to a less upscale neighborhood, that Elsie missed her grandfather, and that it would be good to talk about the future of our family. I heard in her voice not remorse but calculation, a new attempt to exploit my love for my granddaughter. I didn't call back. Instead, I sent Elsie a postcard from Venice with a short story about the city on the water and a promise to bring her a souvenir from her next trip. I got the address from Mrs. Patterson, who was still my link to my past life. Venice was followed by Paris, then Rome, then a cruise to the Greek islands. Each trip opened up new horizons, introduced me to new people, and gave me experiences I had never dreamed of in my measured life as an accountant. Eunice often joined me on these trips, at first as just a friend and traveling companion, but as time went on, our relationship grew warmer. She was not at all like Dorothy, energetic, straightforward, with an unexpected fondness for spicy food and jazz music. But around her, I felt alive, real. I felt that my life didn't end with the death of my wife and the separation from my daughter. "You've changed, Wilfred," Eunice said to me one evening as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset over the river. "When we first met, there was such sadness in your eyes. And now?" I asked, looking at her. "Now you live," she said simply, and took my hand. Marilyn called a few more times, always with the same tone of forced remorse, always mentioning financial difficulties and a difficult family situation. One time she even came to my new apartment. Apparently she'd gotten the address from Mrs. Patterson. "You look good, Dad," she said, standing in the doorway. "The new life looks good on you." "Thanks," I said, not inviting her in. "To what do I owe this visit?" She frowned. We wanted to make up. Lloyd realized he was wrong. We were all wrong." And this realization came to you right after you found out about the sale of my house? I asked bluntly. Marilyn blushed. It's not that. It's just, we're going through a rough patch. Elsie needs some tests, expensive ones, and insurance doesn't cover. How much? I interrupted her. She told me the amount, a considerable sum, but not unaffordable for me now that I was no longer paying most of my pension towards their mortgage. I'll pay for Elsie's tests, I said, directly at the clinic. Send me the details. Thanks, Dad, Marilyn breathed out in relief. I knew you'd understand. Maybe we could have dinner together this weekend? Elsie would love to see you. I shook my head. No, Marilyn. I'll help Elsie because I love her, but it's over between us. You've made your choices, I've made mine. But we're family, she exclaimed with sudden fervor. Family is more than blood ties, I replied. It's respect, caring, sincerity. All of those things are long gone between us. She walked away upset, but I didn't feel guilty. For the first time in a long time, I was honest, with her and with myself. Elsie's examination showed that she had nothing serious, a common allergy that required treatment but was not life-threatening. I was glad of that, although I suspected that Marilyn had exaggerated the seriousness of the situation to get the money. Almost 6 months had passed since then. I continued traveling, now with Eunice, who had become not just a companion, but a close friend. We didn't talk about a future together. At our age, it seemed unnecessary. But we spent more and more time together, and I found that I was able to feel joy again from simple things. A dinner together, a walk in the park, watching an old movie. Elsie sent occasional postcards. Apparently Marilyn had told her about her grandfather and had not even prevented us from communicating, even though at a distance. In one of them, her granddaughter wrote that she would like to see me. I replied that I missed her too and suggested we meet at a neutral place, an ice cream parlor downtown. To my surprise, Marilyn agreed. Maybe it was because there had been a change in her life too. As I learned from Mrs. Patterson, she and Lloyd had divorced. Maybe that loss had taught her to appreciate the family ties that remained. Meeting Elsie was touching. She had grown and changed over the months, becoming more serious but still a child with an open heart. "Do you really live in an apartment overlooking the river?" she asked, eating a huge chocolate chip ice cream cone. "And traveling all over the world?" "I do," I smiled. "Would you like to see some pictures?" We sat in the cafe for 2 hours. Elsie asked me about traveling, about the new apartment, about Eunice. I asked her about school, about her friends, about her hobbies. It was as if we were making up for lost time, and for a moment I realized that I felt no bitterness, only the quiet joy of spending time with my granddaughter and the hope that she would grow up to be a different person than her mother. Marilyn was waiting in the car and didn't join us. As I saw Elsie off, she rolled down her window and nodded at me, not in a friendly way, but with a kind of acknowledgement, as if accepting a new reality in which we existed at a distance, connected only through Elsie. That evening of the same day, I recounted this encounter to Eunice, sitting at our favorite spot on the waterfront. "Do you know what the most amazing thing is?" I said, looking out at the water. "I don't feel guilty anymore. I used to feel like I had betrayed my family, that I had to endure any treatment for the sake of staying connected to my daughter and granddaughter." "And now?" Eunice asked, squeezing my hand. "I realize now that I made the right choice. By giving up my role as a convenient ATM machine, I not only preserved my dignity, but also showed Elsie an important lesson, that respect can't be bought with money." Eunice smiled. "I like this new Wilfred, determined, bold, ready to stand up for himself." "He's not so new," I grinned. "He's just been hiding behind the mask of a compliant old man for a long time." We sat in silence, watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon, painting the river golden and pink. This picture seemed symbolic to me, the sunset of one life and the beginning of another, no less colorful and intense. The next day, Eunice and I bought tickets to Japan. Dorothy had always dreamed of seeing cherry blossoms, and I decided to fulfill that dream, for both of us, and maybe bring back a postcard for Elsie, with the promise of new stories and a possible trip together when she was older.